For many years, quilting has been a pastime enjoyed by people all around the world. Did you know that quilting in its basic form can even be traced far back to the ancient Egyptians? If you're looking for a hobby, I hope this program will get you hooked too. Stay tuned.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program by and for seniors and devoted to exploring the many facets of those better years of our lives. The name of our program was inspired by a quotation from Robert Browning. "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made." Now, sit back and enjoy a program made especially to provide seniors with useful information, plus some lighter moments to brighten your day.
Oh, it's just so much fun.
Quilts are not just to keep us warm or hang up on a wall. Quilts are sentimental heirlooms that come in all colours and sizes and themes. Quilts nurture friendships. Quilting brings together a special community who interact with each other and who put a little bit of themselves into each quilt. Quilters teach each other so that skills can pass down from generation to generation. Quilting is still one of America's favorite pastimes, and our guest is an avid quilter. I'm Val Jeffrey of The Better Part, and I'm delighted to introduce Bonny Morley, known to her friends as Bonny. Welcome, Bonny. Bonny, you bought some beautiful, beautiful quilts, and I'd like to start the program by showing our guests some of the quilts that you've made. Could you tell us about them, and then we'll sit down and chat some more?
Oh, that will be wonderful. Thank you. I'd love to show them. This particular one is called Grandmother's Flower Garden. It was probably pieced in the 1930s. It's a traditional 1930s, all original fabrics in it. And it's lasted for so ever many years.
And it looks the same on the back as it does on the front.
And it's got the quilting around each of the hexagons.
Okay. Was this inspired by a specific pattern?
Yes, it really was. It became a very, very significant kind of a pattern, and many, many women made it.
Okay.
This next one is a reproduction of an antique quilt that was made about 1861. It's a reproduction in the fact that it has the 1960s material in it, and it was all very heavily hand quilted as part of a particular pattern that the owner who actually did the quilting really enjoyed having a whole plethora of quilting stitches. And it has a plain back, and you can see the quilting from there.
It's beautiful. I'm surprised how brightly colored it is.
Yes, actually the fabrics from the 60s really have held up very well. It's all made out of cotton.
Wow.
The whole quilt is cotton.
And this one's completely different.
This one is very different. This one was made in the 60s, 1960, and it's a dahlia quilt, and it's basically made out of fabric scraps from sample books. And so this particular one has Levi Strauss samples in it, as well as little bits of everything else. And it's one that has been quilted, and it was quilted in the 1960s, all finished. It has a cotton backing, and it's yellow.
So are there many companies that do these sample books?
Yes,
you said they came from sample books?
For almost all kinds of fabrics you have sample books, for upholstery fabrics as well as for quilting fabrics, as well as plain cottons and rayons and dacrons and all of those other fabrics that we've used in this century.
Well, I can't wait to hear more about the quilts and see some more, so I think we should sit down and chat. Is that okay?
Yes, that would be wonderful.
So Bonny, there are lots of quilts here. How many quilts have you made?
Well, I think I counted just before I came, and it's 69.
Do you have a favorite?
Yes, I do have a favorite, and it's one that that is really special because of the size and the amount of quilting in it. And I fondly called it my brag quilt. So It's really a sunburst pattern, very bright, very small, but very intricately quilted.
And I do know you showed me at your house your journal, because every one of these quilts you've documented.
That's right.
And this is the journal, right?
This is the journal, and I didn't start it in 1956 because I was too young, but I did pick it up probably about 1980, and I have tried to go backwards through pictures to continuously do that.
I particularly like the pyrotechnics one.
Oh, you do? All right.
Would you read that to us?
Yes, I'd be happy to. In 2001, at the American Quilt Conference in Williamsburg, it gave me the opportunity to bid in a live auction. As my friend Amy Henderson observed, that is the most tattered, garish top that I have ever seen. But then she was my roommate. I noticed that I love the red and the chrome yellow. The green and the khaki background really made my eyes pop. Obviously, I was enthralled with my $20 purchase and decided that I could hardly wait to get it home and have a chance to work on it.
And that one was called Pyrotechnics, and it's actually the one that's over your left shoulder right now. I can't believe that they did these bright, bright quilts in the past. I think of something more sedate when I think about a quilt.
We do, because in the 20th century we really muted our sense of garish colors so that they didn't seem so bold. Well, until we hit the 50s and 60s. And as far as the pyrotechnic one, it was a very popular color range in the 1880s and the 1890s. And so it comes straight out from that period. And it's a quilt that I bought at auction, but I put together, and so I've really enjoyed it.
So what do we need to make a quilt? Give me a shopping list.
A shopping list. Oh, well, first of all, you have to have some material, and then you have to have some padding, and then you have to have a backing. But the most important thing is cutting up your scraps of people and of fabric so that you can put them together.
Now, you go out and buy your fabrics now. You choose the fabrics. But in the past, they used to use bits and pieces of everything. What did they use?
Well, they would use the ends of good shirts so that shirt tails, in other words, could be cut up. Anything that had been worn as clothing, the hems on particular kinds of garments when they were wearing long dresses could be utilized and very often used as strips in quilting. And because of the actual arrangement of being able to make quilts, they would use whatever they could find to make a pleasing visual pattern for themselves, but also to share it among neighbors and between the community at large.
So nowadays, though, you can just go out and buy your fabric. So how do you choose which fabric you're going to put together?
Very often it's your visual acuity, how you like to look at colors and how you like to make a pattern. So I would say that we purchase fabric specifically for maybe a complete project if we're doing it for a friend. Sometimes if we're doing it for ourselves, it really doesn't matter because we already have a huge stash of material, and I tend to pull away from, I always pull all of my samples in that direction. So it's different for each person.
And when did synthetics come on the scene, and do you use synthetics?
Synthetics actually came quite early on, about 1925, I would say, when DuPont started manufacturing thread that had polyester in it, as well as materials that would then become for parachutes and all of that. And so they've been in the industry for a long time. But for us, it's the amount of polyester that is now in what we would consider to be 100% cotton spools, and it's now 50-50, and it's almost gone up down to 22 cotton and 75 or 77 poly.
That must help with the wear, though, mustn't it? The synthetics are introduced to help the fabric.
They did that because they had more filament. and they could use it and, you know, and spread it much more quickly. However, in the old materials, the polyester can cut through the old cottons, and so we still try to only use cotton thread if we can find it for repairing old quilt tops from the 1800s.
Right. So that's the fabric on the front and on the back. So in the middle, what do you put in the middle of a quilt?
In the middle we have a batting, and in this particular case it's a polyester batting because it's lightweight. You have cotton that was all carded and made out of cotton seed, and flax, and you had all the weaving, so it was a big job to do this in the 1800s. But for the 1900s, we've really had, you know, sort of smooth sailing as soon as we got to the 20th century.
I suppose, did they have insects as well in?
Oh, I'm sure they did, and maybe a little weevil here and there, but then...
Weevil in the weaving. So how do you come up with your designs? I mean, this is the Hawaiian one, this one at the back of us, isn't it?
Yes.
How did you come up with that?
Actually, it was something that I found in a quilt shop that was much smaller. It only had the central medallion. And the nicest part about Hawaiian quilting is that you can just continue to quilt all of the lines, and they meander about a ½ an inch apart. And so you're not restricted to only doing something exactly the same. You can have great variety in being able to do Hawaiian quilting. It takes a long time, but it's fun.
Well, I'm learning more and more from you, Bonnie. I tell you, I always thought that quilting was the actual fabric going to the fabric, but quilting is really the stitching on the quilt.
It really is, and you have to go through all 3 layers, making your tiny stitches as closely as possible and enjoying the process. This quilt probably took me at least 2 years to quilt, but with a multitudinous amounts of friends, because they would help me with this one too.
So quilts always look the same on the front and the back. Is the quilting always the same on the front and the back?
You try to make it that way. You follow a particular design that you might be interested in, and then you duplicate that as closely as you can. Otherwise, you can just be very freewheeling about the whole thing and start like the Hawaiian quilt and just keep going until you're finished.
Okay, so what kind of occasions do you make quilts for?
Oh, they really are family occasions in terms of how we respond to our own family members. So for me, I started making a quilt first for myself, and then one for my brother, and then one for my mother, and then it just multiplied because children came along, and then grandchildren came along, and then aunts and uncles and brothers and cousins and all of that. So it's a family event that then moves out into the community, and the community becomes the people that you are in contact with, that you really enjoying being with, who can quilt together.
I remember you told me a story about your husband Dave, that he was complaining to you that everyone else was getting a quilt and he wasn't. So tell our guests what you did.
After 30 years of marriage, I realized that maybe he did deserve to have his own quiltie. And as it turned out, I was able to lug it around in a very large garbage can for probably 2 years, because he never knew I was doing this surreptitiously. And at a barbershop convention in Oxnard, way back 20 years ago, he decided that I decided that I would take this quilt, and our sons had encouraged me to please give this to him. So when I gave it to him at our dinner party, he stood up in this restaurant, and our sons made him read our wedding vows. Oh. So it's a 30-year anniversary quilt for David, and he has his own blankie now.
So tell me about this quilt.
Oh, this quilt is a double wedding ring quilt, and it's one that was made in the 1980s by a young woman who wanted to have something special for her wedding. And so Anne Sophie, your friend, and I collaborated on how we would put this together. And it was a wonderful time, because all the guests that were invited to the wedding had a chance to choose their own colors for this out of a huge stash of colors. but Pia was very, very specific about the color range that she liked. And so all the colors were done in greens and in blues with shots of yellow. And so that's how that one came to be. And then her mother, Aunt Sophie, was the one who did the actual quilting on it. And I think I have one, you know, that I seem to have my hand on right now.
This is Pia's quilt.
That's Pia's
so
quilt.
Let's show them Pia's quilt.
Oh, yes.
And this is how we first met.
It
Because I
really
actually have
is.
one on here.
Yes.
Well, what do you call it, the pieces that we put together?
It's the pieces that we put together were the segments of the rings, and they're wedding rings.
Okay.
And each of these quarters create the whole. And inside each of these is an autographed center by whichever person had chosen to actually put the pieces together.
Yeah.
And so
we have a Valerie, and we have a Gordon, my husband.
that's right. And we even have a Bonnie, and we have a David.
Good, excellent. So this was a copy of an old quilt.
Yes.
Well, I've got a surprise for you, Bonnie, because it just so happens that I've been talking to people, and I find out everyone's a quilter, and I didn't know. My next door neighbor, Glenda, she said, "Oh, I've got one you can take." And you know what it is? It's an original. This one here is this design made in the 1930s. It's her great-grandmother's quilt. And I said, it's such a coincidence. I've got to take it. I've got to take it. But again, the quilting on it. The quilting, of course, guys, is the stitching that holds it together. Look at the elaborate stitching on it.
Yes, very heavily quilted. And that was one of the ways when people went through the Depression in the 30s, they would use any kinds of scraps. And as you can see, these segments are probably half the size of the segments that were put in Pia's.
Right.
And they really were randomly done. Unless you happen to love red or pink or purple, you would see a multitude number of colors.
Yeah.
And the stitching is beautiful. It's totally done, and to have the scallop that comes around the outside edge and bound is always a very difficult thing to do. So
Right.
your neighbor's grandmother did a wonderful job. She really did.
Well, I know that Anne Sophie did the quilting on this one, right? Mm-hmm. You taught her how to do that? Is this how you met her? I don't remember.
It is, you're right, it is. She decided to have a small sewing and talking group, and I thought, oh, I guess I'll go on over. There were 6 or 7 of us, and that's how we really met. And before you knew it, she was quilting up a storm way past some of the things that I was doing. And so we've enjoyed the companionship of doing things together, but also solo. So it's wonderful to have had her as a friend and to be able to see this today.
Well, I have got a little bit of footage of Anne Sophie and you working on this quilt. And it must have been several years ago, tucked away in my archives, but I'll find it.
Don't be nervous now. You're on camera.
I mean, this is it. This is the big time.
It turned out into a much bigger quilt than we originally, I think we were thinking,
About 4 squares or...
yeah, 4 squares maybe. And now it's 55 squares, I think is.
I think it's, it's really grown. It's really grown.
So what we're doing now is tracing the names using this pencil. I'm writing it in, and then I'm going to embroider the name in each of these melons that the person originally designed with the colors. So Pia and Doug will be able to see who came up with the color scheme and for each of the melons. And then when we put these melons together, we put them in circles where friends and family are together. So there's a circle where Doug and his parents are in, another circle where Pia and Amanda and Phil and I are in. So there is this friends woven into the circles, and there is families woven into interlocking circles. So we're quite jazzed. We think we've designed something really cool.
Now, the embroidering of the names, how do you do that?
That's done just on the top. You don't want to put your embroidery thread all the way up and down. So what Aunt Sophie did was to use some silk thread and do tiny little back stitches to embroider the person's name. I physically marked the name on the quilt top, and then she was the one that had to follow all the little dots and put the names in.
Well, Pia's sister also got married, so you made a quilt for that too, didn't you? Or did Aunt Sophie
Yes.
make that? Tell me about that quilt.
Oh, that one was really fun. That's a Hawaiian quilt, but it's done in miniature, much smaller. And each guest at that particular wedding made a snowflake pattern out of paper. We just said, draw something, you know, fold it in quarters, draw something on it, and we'll see if we can turn it into a piece for the quilt. So that's what we did. All the men came first, which was the most amazing thing. They I think, had much more competition than the ladies did. And then all the ladies sort of started to fill in, all the young friends. And we have 30 patches on that one, and they're all named for the owner that actually cut out the pattern. And then Aunt Sophie and I did all of the work on it in terms of stitching them down and then quilting it.
So do many men quilt?
Actually, in my quilting group that I have in San Francisco, I go every Wednesday. We now have 2 men that come regularly who are very fine quilters. I should say one is actually a teacher who actually teaches quilting, and the other one is somebody who's retired from the telephone company and said, I'm out of here, I'm going quilting. So it's fun to have that.
But you've been going there for a long time.
Yes, ever since I returned in about 1984 when our sons went off to school, and now I've gone regularly every week since then.
Going back to Pia's quilt, I remember Aunt Sophie saying to me that the personalities of people go into the quilt, and you gave us all the same fabric to pick from. And yet there was an engineer who'd put his together really precisely. And then there's someone else that just grabs another one. What kind of quilter are you? Are you an impulsive quilter, or are you an engineer quilter?
That's an interesting idea. I think for me, I tend to be very visual, and so I'm not afraid of using color. I like to put them together like an engineer would, but I don't always have to worry whether I have a red dot or a blue dot. I might want to have a purple and green dot. So I have to say, for me, it's the visual aspect. And then I like putting things together after I've done that.
Yeah. The group that you're with, which is in San Francisco, it's a long way to go, but I understand you're from that area anyway, which is why you've been going back. But I know there was a really special person from the church there in the group that got you started in the first place, and I believe you were only 16 at the time.
You're right.
Tell us about her.
Her name was Alice Swank, and she was 20 years older than I was, and she actually was in the church, belonged to the church, and she invited all of the young women at that time. We were 14 and 15 and 16 years old, to come over on a summer holiday to see if we would just like to stitch. And the first time she called anybody, it was, oh no, we don't want to do that. It's not something we'd like to do. At least that was my really direct response. The next week she called back and she said, oh, I thought you might like to know that my husband is going to be teaching bridge to all the guys. And I wondered if you girls might like to come maybe an hour earlier, and we'll have cookies, and then maybe you'll want to hang out with them afterwards. Well, that next week she got all 10 of us there, and it was wonderful because that continued on for me. That was my entry into the quilt world. And so I worked on that quilt for 2 years, and then at the end of it, Alice Swank and her husband said they would take me out to Skoma's in San Francisco for dinner because I had won. I was the one that had actually finished the first quilt from the 2 years before.
And which one was that?
That's the Dahlia quilt. That's that old, very faded yellow and black pattern that that I always remember, and why I chose black for a yellow quilt, I'll never know, but when you're young, you'll just put anything in it.
And sadly, Alice passed away at age 56, very young.
Yeah, very young.
And
very
I know
young.
that you were the executor, and you had 27 unfinished quilts that you inherited from Alice.
27, all
27.
unfinished.
All unfinished. How long has it taken you to finish them?
Well, let's see. It's probably taken me at least 40 years to get to all of them. But I plod one step in front of the other, and just enjoy doing it. It's been a wonderful way for me to keep her in my life, but to also know that she taught me so much, and I love the sense that I can always enjoy this hobby because of her, and the community that she brought with her, and the wonderful people that I've gotten to know all over the country, because I enjoy quilting and they do too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, they're beautiful quilts, and they've made beautiful friendships, and I think quilting will go on forever, even if the quilts don't. But I want to thank you so much, Bonny. You brought in all these wonderful, wonderful quilts. I said to the crew, they're going to blow you away, and I think they really, really have. Thank you for coming.
That's so kind of you. Thank you.
Lovely.
I loved it. It was so much fun.
It's so much fun when you look at the color scheme that people picked out. And the one that Bonny and I have had the most fun with has been this young engineering type from Sweden. You see how all of these are, perfectly matched, complementary, just like an engineer would do.
Very orderly.
Very orderly. And then next to it is this young man who's not that orderly, but has a really good eye for color. And see how vivid the colors are in this one? But they're all beautiful. They're all beautiful.
We hope that you've enjoyed the program today and would join us again. Copies of this program and all our programs are available on VHS or DVD. To contact The Better Part, please phone the Cupertino Senior Centre 408-777-3150 or visit our website www.thebetterpart.com. Thank you for watching.